Good morning.
Before I get started, I'm Jim Storck, Fairfax County Supervisor of the Alberta District, which is the perfect group for me to be in. And anybody who hasn't been to Mount Vernon, George Washington State, is just an amazing place. And
No, just you.
join us.
I'm sorry.
We have a wonderful session this morning, and we've got really the expert, and I've heard Jim many times, and he's been part of the Finance Committee and Elections Committee, of which I chair for VACo. And I just want to do a quick introduction of Jim, and then we're going to go right at it, and he's going to really kind of not only tell you what he knows, more importantly, but can give you some insights about where he thinks things can go. But most importantly, we want you to be thinking about those things, those questions or issues that we want to, I'd say, look for consensus, look for ways that particularly VACo can influence this process. I know we may have some different perspectives, but I think we're going to be a lot of consensus on things that we know are important to our communities, and Jim can give us some insights about how best to do that. So we have coming in 2025 the short session, which is a 45-day session for legislators. The state biennium budgets are generally considered in the short session, but only for amendment. So we're looking for opportunity, or they're looking for opportunities to maybe support some additional needs. The key on this is that next week the money committees will hold their pre-annual pre-session retreats, which will give us some insight as to what they're thinking about, and the direction they might go. In about 5 weeks, the governor will be presenting his proposed budget amendments to those money committees and for the General Assembly to consider in January. Again, there's some important context to our advocacy, and Jim is going to help us. Jim Regimbal is going to help us do that. Many of you know Jim. I've really had a chance to get to know him over the last few years, as he's particularly been involved with the Finance Committee and the things that we do there. And I would invite every single person in this room to join us on the Finance Committee. We have a few folks there, but I think we could benefit a lot more from your insight and having more of you engaged and involved with that committee. So please join us in the future for that. Again, Jim has more than 40 years experience in the state and local budget and tax policy analysis. He served for 12 years on the Virginia State Finance Committee from 1987 to 1999, where he really brought to the committee, worked with him, his expertise in tax policy, transportation, and finance agency budgets, and economic and revenue forecasting. In 1999, Jim co-founded Fiscal Analytics Limited, where his expertise in state and local budget and tax policy issues has been provided to local governments, business groups, trade associations, and nonprofit organizations. Jim has a BS in economics from the University of Pacific and an MBA from Virginia Commonwealth University. And with that, please welcome Jim Regimbal.
Thank you very much, and thanks for coming. I think we're going to have an interesting session, I hope, and I think I'm going to give you some good information about Virginia's economy, about the state budget, and about maybe where we can have some options to solve some of the issues, budget issues that you are all interested in. So that's sort of my goal, okay, today. And I'm going to get right into it. Here, put my glasses on so I can see it. So, I get to tell you the good news first. The good news is, in my 40 years of doing this, plus, I don't think I've seen a time where, at this particular moment, things look as good as they do for the state finances. That doesn't mean everything's the world's good, but the state finances are great. You know, we've had 4 years in a row of plus over $1 billion in revenues above what's in the adopted budget. So we get to the end of the fiscal year, and what they forecasted were more than $1 billion above that. 4 years in a row. We have $1.2 billion in fiscal 24. So what happens when you have these revenues above your adopted budget? The base is higher than they expect, right? So that you would think that the next year and the year after, the base is higher, right? They didn't expect it, so all of a sudden, boom, you got this much more money, right? Unless things go in the tank. So you start off with that. So you not only get your surplus, but you get this heightened base going forward of revenues, which was unexpected, which was not in the adopted budget, right? So that's good. Then you start looking at the economy, you go, okay, are we going to fall off the cliff? You think, is that higher base going to be eroded by an economy that's not as good as we think? No. We've got pretty low unemployment right now. We've got pretty good wage growth. We've got things that are looking good right now. So if you're the governor and you're forecasting the economy for the rest of fiscal 25 and 26, there's not a whole lot out there to say, wow, things are going to go in the tank. Sure, we all experience the exogenous, COVID or something that could happen that we don't know about. So yes, that's always a possibility, but we don't know. So you can't really forecast that, right? So right now, we're looking pretty good on both this higher base and the economics. And I'll talk about the economics a little more in a second. But then we have, what do we have? We have a really solid balance sheet in Virginia. We've got $4.7 billion sitting in the bank in mandatory rainy day reserves and voluntary reserves. It's about 55 mandatory, 45 voluntary. Voluntary means they can tap that anytime they want. Spend it. The rainy day fund, the mandatory constitutional, there's got to be certain. You got to be 2% worth. I mean, you got to have a recession essentially to be able to get into that. So, but we got a great balance sheet. We've got reserves sitting there if things do go bad, right? Then also we've got debt capacity that's improved a lot. If you go back 10 years, I was sitting here telling you guys, man, our interest expenses are going up and up and up because we were floating a lot of debt. Things weren't that great. We were having to float debt for our higher education, our transportation, etc. Our state buildings. Well, we've been using cash because of these surpluses, and they hadn't wanted to put these surpluses into ongoing expenditures, so they've been using it to bolster VRS, to use cash for capital. So again, the balance sheet is looking pretty good. And so if we do have harder times, we've got a lot to fall back on because of this strong balance sheet. Okay, so that's why I'm saying things look pretty good. And then here's the one caveat now on this good news page. If you'd have asked me a week ago, I was getting up and did a talk to the school superintendents, and I said, man, things are really rosy. Well, guess what? DMAS comes out with a Medicaid forecast, totally unexpected, early November, a week ago or less. They need $641 million more dollars from Medicaid. And about $300 million ongoing. Yes, over 2 years, but $300 million ongoing. So that's going to eat into the available revenues, which, if you'd asked me a week ago, I didn't think was there because everyone was telling me that we think we've got plenty of money in for Medicaid. We're looking pretty good there. We forecasted enough. Apparently not. And the reason why is because there's more people than they expected on the rolls from the unwinding from the pandemic. More people are staying on the Medicaid rolls, and we have higher Medicare reimbursement costs. Don't ask me to totally understand it. This is totally new, not only to me, but to everyone out there. People are still analyzing this. Go to the House and Senate retreats next week, and I'm sure they'll get a better handle on why these higher Medicaid forecasts have come out. So that's the one we've got, and we're going to have a need to control healthcare costs in the future. So let's talk about revenues a little more. So after that $1.2 billion, there was contingent appropriations, $175 million for I-81. They put over $400 million into the Water Quality Improvement Fund, and there were some other things, including the military student program, the military tuition program. They put some more money to that. So it drew it down, that $1.2 billion available to spend, to about $500 million. Okay, so that's what's available from the surplus of $1.2 billion, because they thought there was going to be maybe another surplus, so they decided to put contingent appropriations in the budget if there was a surplus. So remember, higher base, that's the main thing. So if you apply 3% growth to this higher base, and then only 2% in 26 fiscal year, you get $2.5 billion in extra revenue. So 3%, 2%, that's almost recessionary conditions in growth, because remember, you got inflation. Wage and salary growth, if you're only growing that much. We grew in fiscal 24, 6% wage and salary, 6%. They're expecting about 5% conservatively in 25. This is the forecast that are never right. 4% in 26, okay? So that's if you're an economist, you're saying, what am I going to put down on a piece of paper for a revenue forecast? I'm going to put 5%, maybe a 4%, 25 and 26. Well, that's higher than 3 and 2, right? So, and that's the main thing. Income tax is more than 2/3 of the general fund. And so it's very important what your wage and salary growth is. But I'm hearing that they're going to be really conservative in this introduced budget. So I'm being conservative to you, but I'm saying, okay, 500 million, 2.5 billion higher forecast for 25-26, that's 3 billion. I actually think it's going to be more than that. Okay, when the dust settles. I can't tell you what the government introduced bill is going to be. Can I use the word sandbag? They use 3 and 2. Okay, for whatever reasons, I don't know why. Maybe I should have said that, but I think it's low. So I kind of told you that, but there are exogenous risks potentially. One that just comes to mind right now. This has nothing to do with politics, but you may think this is good. You may not think it's good. But if there's a reorganization of the federal government, Virginia relies on a lot of federal employment. And so if there's a lot of federal employment cut in the next couple of years, that could hurt Virginia. So there's an exogenous impact right there. You can kind of see the tensions. Okay, there's others. Now I look, non-withholding has grown faster than it was ever expected. What's non-withholding? Part of the income tax, that's your capital gains, that's your small businesses that don't pay withholding, they pay estimated payments. That goes in the non-withholding line. And that's been growing rapidly over the years. And it used to be like 18% of the total general funds, now well over 20%. And they keep expecting that to fall off a cliff because they keep getting really conservative forecasting that. Well, what's the stock market been doing lately? It ain't been going down. So I can tell you when people file their taxes in the spring for fiscal 25, it's going to look pretty good. So if you see a level forecasted or a lower forecasted non-withholding, be skeptical of that, okay? That's where these surpluses have been coming, from this non-withholding category, most of them, okay? More money's been coming in than expected from that. That's why they keep on saying, can't keep doing it, can't keep doing it, all right? That's one. Then also watch, if you're out there, watch the unemployment claims numbers, okay? Those have stayed low, but if those start ticking up, and I mean ticking up, then you start thinking recession. They're not. And then watch construction employment, because every recession I've ever seen, 30% of the lost employment is construction industry. So it's kind of a canary in the coal mine, okay? So you can kind of watch those. Now, here's the economics. So this is the forecast, these lines. So look at this is being wage and salary, being employment. You can look at this one. So the first quarter, fiscal 24, kind of right near what they forecasted. Pretty good forecast, right? Then they're expecting to go down, down, down. Well, look what actually happened. It didn't go down, down, down. Okay. And so this is the out-year forecast from last year, from the budget that's currently in place. That was the last year at this time they did that. Do you really think that's going to go to there? No. Okay. So that's why this is going to get adjusted. Kind of keep an eye on what they're saying, the revenue growth, and I think it's going to be pretty good. Here's another data point for you. The first 3 months, the revenue forecast sitting in the adopted budget right now is about -3%. Okay, they're expecting because they didn't see this higher base, right? So their original forecast is about from where we are now, about 3% less. Through the first 3 months, almost 10% growth year over year. Now, I happen to know from my contacts that's going to go down to about 8.5 through October. Okay.
Can everybody hear Jim when he steps away from the mic? I just want to be sure that.
Can you all hear me? Pretty loud. Sorry, I just wanted to key you in on some things. So, 10% first 3 months, probably first 4 months, 8.5% growth. And remember the budget. I said, remember that forecast of 2.5, 3%. It's probably going to really be higher than that. Okay, at the end of the year, non-withholding is not going to fall off the cliff. Okay, and wages and salary. The wage and salaries and withholding is probably going to be 4% for fiscal year. If I had to guess right now, again, guess. So now these charts show you what the solid lines, the actuals, and then the forecast that's in the adopted budget for the biennium. That's going to get revised in a few years. Okay, those orange lines, they're going to get revised. This up here is what the revenues would have been if the tax cuts that were adopted the last few sessions had occurred. That's how much additional revenue, about I think 2.5 and then 1.5 billion. 2.5 first 2 years, 2.5, 2.3, then 1.5 ongoing from the higher standard deduction, higher earned income tax, earned income tax credit mainly, and higher military deductions. So the solid lines is the actual, that's what it would have been with tax, but you see that drop from the blue to orange, that negative 3%, not going to happen, okay? That's going to get revised. So now let's start talking about spending. I tried to highlight the large items. When you go to the last column, and you'll see what the biennium changed from what's been adopted, what's currently in place for 25-26 versus 23-24. So you can kind of see what they did in that adopted budget last session, beginning in June, when they adopted it, where the money went. Okay, that's what I'm trying to show you, where that money went. Well, the biggest single place it went was Medicaid. Okay, so Medicaid's starting to grow. And I just told you, that doesn't include the $641 million they just forecast. Okay, this is what's in the adopted budget, not what's going to come. Because it's going to get revised, 25 and 26, in this coming session, in the mid-session. So that's where it's spent. And then when you look at K-12, that includes well over $400 million in child care general funds, which they hadn't done before. Because when the Fed stepped up and had the child care subsidy program, and it ended after the pandemic, and we stepped up and put general funds to keep it going. And they put that in the K-12 direct aid DOE part of the budget. And so you can say, well, should that really go there? You know, the child care money, it is in there. So maybe I should have taken it out. But you can kind of take out that 440. You know, it's really $1 billion in sort of apples to apples comparison to previous years, what they put into really K-12. So, you know, it did okay, but it's not like it really did real well, K-12, and how much, where the money was spent. That's sort of the bottom line here. You know, we didn't have to put money into the rainy day anymore. We've already, like I said, we've already got tons of money there, so when you compare it, look, it's negative, because we didn't have to do that. We put a lot of money, we have been putting a lot of money in natural resources, water quality. And we've been putting a lot of money into mental health. So other health and human services, that's where that is. That's the whole mental health efforts we've been trying to improve in Virginia. And you'll see that a couple more times. So these next few slides give you a little detail on what the new money that I just talked in a general way, the kind of programs they were. And I didn't put everything here, because that would be pages and pages and pages. I'm going to do this in an hour and 15 minutes. So I kind of tried to give you the big ones. And I may have missed a few things here and there, but you know, the salary increases, you can see that, 3% each year. They did adopt the JLARC recommendation for expanding the at-risk add-on and the prevention, intervention, remediation program. That's already in the SOQ. They put a lot of money into that. That was where their real initiative for the JLARC recommendation, and last one was, they put a good amount of money into at-risk children program. And also English learner and the reading specialist. So they did improve those staffing centers as well, which were also part of the JLR study recommendation. So they did a piece of it in the last budget. You know, you've got money from casino revenues. That's actually not general funds. And then literary fund, really not general funds either, but I wanted to show you they did because our balance sheet is so good, and they have to divert money from the literary fund, they can actually use it again for school construction loans instead of all the going to teacher retirement and offsetting general funds for teacher retirement. They're actually using the literary fund that's really designed for it. Okay, I'll kind of put it there. Health and Human Services, you see the Medicaid utilization inflation, and I did miss something. They also put $95 million as a contingency for more people staying in the program than they expected. So they kind of anticipated what I said earlier about the 641. They put 95, and they've already tapped into that. So this is above and beyond. I should have put 95 million. You can see there's a whole series of things, development of disability. You know, the Children's Services Act is also starting to go up. It's stabilized for a while. And you participate in that, about 30% at the local level. It's sum sufficient, so whatever gets, they need for that, they have to spend regardless of the appropriation. It's a sum sufficient. So these are just estimates. But that's been going up, and it's going to go up again in the session coming up. Other items, you can see some of the one-time stuff. The capital outlay, maintenance reserve, use surplus for equipment, upgrades. So that's when you get these surpluses, you think, oh, is it just one time or can I do it ongoing? Well, to be conservative, you say, we're just going to use for one time with capital outlay, equipment, things like that. They did give state employees those 3% raises as well. You can see some of the higher education stuff, which is done pretty well. And I'll show you some in a little bit. Higher education has gotten its share of money over the years. Okay, and they continue. But Hampton Roads totally, that's new. Interstate 81, not counting contingency of program 175, they put into the budget 70 million. So they got that plus 175 for 81. And then you can see some of the storm stuff below and aid police and local governments use as well. So those are some of the other major ones that were put in the budget. So this does a little comparison of over time. I did a 25-year sort of growth and then a 10-year, the last 10 years. And K-12 has kind of grown at the rate of the growth of the general fund in both cases, 25 over 10 years. You haven't done worse, you haven't done better in K-12. What's done better generally is Medicaid, other health and human services, and in some cases higher education, particularly in the last 10 years. So that's where it's grown. And then of course you see the big with natural resource, but that's not a lot of money. That's not nearly as much money as the other categories. But it has been, like I said earlier, we have been putting a lot of money into water quality. In fact, like I said, well over 400 million out of that surplus, which is not reflected here, is being put out of that $1.2 billion into the water quality fund. So I think that's helped local government too, in you're improving your water systems. But a lot of it now is going non-form. So, but you probably get some still, haven't you, to help your water system? Yeah. So they've been putting a lot of money into it. This, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but you can take this back with you and look at how all the state aid and local governments, these are all the programs that try to summarize it and how you've done over time, with its growth. And you can see that if you go to the bottom line, local aid out of the general fund, the peak year was 2009, right before the financial crisis. And then it's sort of hovered in this 40 to 43% range. It got dropped down, so you're really kind of staying around there as a percentage of the general fund. The places that have grown, are, again, mental health, your CSBs, the CSA program is starting to grow again. I think the sheriffs have done okay. They're starting to get more money, and I know that there's still asks out there for fulfilling their, the 1 in 1,500 other constitutional officers. So they're not through with that either. There's asks there still, but it has been growing. This chart tries to give you a pictorial look at K-12 funding on a per pupil basis. Okay, and it's adjusted. It's nominal terms, the blue line, and the red line is adjusted for inflation. So when people say, "Oh, we've been putting a lot more money into K-12," that's true on a per pupil basis as well. But when you adjust it for inflation, and particularly the last few years, which, up to 90%, then it doesn't look quite as good. Yes, it's more than 2009 finally. We finally got past the 2009 inflation-adjusted numbers. I think it was 2023. Yeah, 2023. So we're above that now in inflation-adjusted terms. So there has been improvement in K-12, and this chart kind of gives you the flavor for that. Now, I'm doing pretty good on time. How much do you guys know, maybe some more than others, but what the JLOC recommendations were? Pretty good? You guys are pretty aware that you've probably heard about that quite a bit lately. But I put on one page here what those recommendations were. Of course, there's a thick document that backs this up, but in total it was $3.5 billion a year is what they were saying was needed for the state to adequately fund K-12. That's a lot of money. And so that's part of this presentation is, okay, how can we do that? How can we actually fund this JLOC report? I know that's the biggest expenditure at the local government levels for schools. So, it's going to take a significant amount of money. And I think this year, given where I believe the economy is and our revenue situation, they have the opportunity to chip away at that. I'm not going to completely fund this, but chip away at that. So let's pay attention to that, you know, how much they chip away. They did the second to bottom, the harder to educate students. They basically fulfilled that recommendation last session. Okay, they put, that was about $250 million a year, and that's kind of what they did. So you're shaking your head, Jeff. You didn't see that. Pardon?
You didn't get it the way they use the poverty line for these kids. We get nothing out of that.
Fairfax doesn't get any money?
We lost money.
Well, I do know they put that money and where and when. You know, I guess you have to take a look at the individual localities. They're using, what they did was they updated the way they calculate an at-risk kid. They used a more expansive definition of it. And that's what plugged a lot more money, so more kids qualified. And then they gave you a minimum of 11%, I believe it was, and then up to 36%, depending on your concentration of at-risk kids. So it's a pretty complicated formula. I think on one slide I sort of give you the formula, but I'd have to look at each individual locality. The biggest single item, now there's some what we call, you know, what they had was sort of, let's do in the short term, JLARC recommendations, and let's do over the longer term. And you can imagine the longer term is really recognizing that only the 2/3 of the staff that the SOQ recognizes. So you have 1/3 of your, on average, 1/3 of the staff that the state doesn't even recognize that you have. And I've said this for years, the largest single category of that is teacher aides. Not necessarily the most expensive because they're paid less, but they only recognize about 3,000 out of 21,000 teacher aides. So you pay full 100% freight for those 18,000 teacher aides in the school districts. Assistant principals is another big category. They only recognize maybe 1/4 of your assistant principals. So there's two you can pull out of there right away and say, yeah, let's start with those. And they'll chip away at the $1.8 billion a year in underfunding there. But the other categories were a re-benchmark, and I've said this over the years to you. You know, the re-benchmark brings you to the start of the biennium, but it doesn't recognize the cost over the next 2 years. So it gets you at the beginning, and it doesn't do a good job. And so with JLARC is saying, yeah, you need to do better and recognize during the biennium, you know, what those cost increases are. The prevailing salary, I've said for years, I told them, you can't, this linear weighted average prevailing salary was not accurate. So what it did, it took every school district, no matter the size, and gave them 1 point on the line. You know, this is what you pay, Lee County, this is what you pay Fairfax. You're given the same weight. Now, if you were very highly paid, you were 2 standard deviations out on either side. They lopped you off, and then they took the average of that. But still, way more rural school divisions that pay a lot less than major urban, major suburban school districts that pay a lot more. And so the prevailing salary in the budgets are less, and they recognize that, and so that would cost $190 million a year to fix. That's kind of a low-hanging fruit, that maybe they can do this session, they can fix that. The temporary cuts, you've talked many times here, Jeremy has, and you've worked on that, you know, getting the support cap fully restored from 2009 up to 26 positions per, I think, 1,000 people. It's now 24. They brought it from like 17 to 24. It needs to go to 26 to get you back to 2009. There was a whole series of other small little things they did, via federal deducts and other complicated things they didn't recognize, certain costs, transportation costs, that make up that $150 million. That's low-hanging fruit. They could restore that this session, okay? Then, you know, one of the ones I know a lot of you are interested in, well, there's 2 of them. There's the making the cost of living adjustment for not just Coca in Northern Virginia or near Northern Virginia, but to any locality that's got an above average cost of living than the state average will get some relief from that. Okay, so Richmond City, higher than the average, would get some relief if you adopted that proposal. Of course, Northern Virginia would get more relief. These small school divisions, if you're 2,000 kids, you know, I helped combine Covington and Allegheny County, did a study for them. I mean, when you have to have, and so there's others out there, when you have to have superintendent, principals, you know, and they're much smaller schools, you know, and so you can see the economies of scale. You still have to have them, but it costs a lot. So that's what that's all about, trying to fix that. So that's the JLARC proposal. You know, they chipped away a little bit last session with the at-risk kids. Hearing Jeff, I'm going to look more into that. that part of it. But that's the JLARC. Hope that makes sense. Now, JLARC also, well, let me talk about one more thing. They talked about the LCI, the Local Composite Index. And what they basically said there was that it works pretty well. And I know a lot of you disagree with that. That's a humor line. That's what they said. So they actually made two major proposals on that. And one of them was to use a 3-year average. So if you have a big change, let's say you're Greenville and you have a big power plant coming in a small locality, their composite index went up by 12 points in 1 year. Okay, that would solve that, at least partially, 3-year average, and we would phase them into it. But it doesn't solve the main problems. And then they said we need to use a way more disaggregated method of calculating the ability to pay, calculating the numerator part, which, you know, right now it's 50% real estate, 10% sales taxes, which goes back to 1970, sort of general how you raise revenue, 40% everything else. Think VACo, machinery and tools, meals tax, that's all lumped into 40% your adjusted gross income of the people living in your locality, you know, on your tax returns. Well, JLR said that we need to be way more precise about that and look at everyone's actual taxes and do a much more disaggregated look for that numerator. Okay, so they did recommend that, and that might help some. Okay, but I haven't done a full-on analysis of how that would impact everything. But that is out there as well. And I know a lot of people don't agree that the LCI works that well in general. So that's all I can say about that right now. But they also went to they said, look, we really should go to a student-based funding model. And it sounds great, and I actually proposed this with my partner at the time back in 2002. And we didn't use an LCI at all. We used a grouping of 6 different locality types. You know, Northern Virginia, because they were such an outlier, especially at the time, but cities, large cities, small cities, suburban, suburbanizing, rural, you know, and then we said, those are the types, and they all have similar costs instead of using LCI. And so we did it that way, but I don't think they're going to go this way if they do it in the state. They're going to probably keep something akin to an LCI. All right, so don't get excited about something like that. That was our idea back at the time, because JLR talked about, you know, ability to pay LCI kind of measure in moving the student base. But basically what that is looking at the historical costs of educating kids. Okay, and so it wouldn't be an SOQ with the state defines. Just say, look, we're going to go look at this, what it really costs, and to do that, to get from A to B, that's going to cost the state a lot of money because they don't recognize all the costs right now, right? And so to move to the student-based model, which is way simpler to understand, you basically, historical costs, you decide how much the locals are going to pay of that, and the state's going to pay, and that probably is political, but you add some things on for at-risk education because higher the cost to educate that kid, special ed, English learners, you know, the economy of scale schools, and then the higher cost schools. So you kind of throw all that in, and then you say, this is how much it costs, and then we're going to say, you locals pay X, you state pays X. But to get from A to B, it's probably easier if the state right now recognizes more of the costs, because you're going to have to still find $3.5 billion to get to this student-based funding formula, right? If they're going to at least provide 50%, for example, of the cost. Okay, so doesn't solve that problem. Okay, gets it simpler if you can get there, and that's why a lot of states have phased this in. They phased in moving to a student-based funding formula. They haven't just done it overnight. States studying that right, that study committee. Don't expect anything huge, you know, this year coming from there. This is going to be a longer-term project. So, what are the other potentials? So you kind of see that's the education side of the demands on the policymakers, the budget guys in the state. There's other, you know, outside of JLR's recommendations, you still got to provide salary increases. And so each point for a full year is $91 million. And same for the state employees. It's weird. It's the same amount. State employees and teachers, same amount per year. They wouldn't fund the whole year. They might only do fiscal 26, give you a raise this time. And 3% is already there, but if they raised it to 4 for the whole year, it'd be $91 million for teachers and $91 million for additional for state employees. We know about the Medicaid forecast. I've talked about that. mental health, they're still absorbing all the increases we put in. So how much they're going to ask, I'm sure there will be, but how much more is provided, don't know. I know there will be. Children's Services Act, that's $35 million a year, it's going to be asked for. Okay, and remember, that's sum sufficient, so they basically just take the forecast and put it in because they're going to have to pay it in. So probably expect that. Higher education wants more financial aid. You know, they always do backfill funding for the military tuition, you know, cost reduction losses. They're going to want that. Community colleges wants more career and technical education programs. We know that there's not enough of this child care, I forget the exact term of it, but the child care funding slots. There wasn't enough. Even though we put a bunch of general funds, you know, the feds did a lot, that ended. We put general funds in to make up for it. Well, there's higher demand for child care subsidy programs. So I expect more to be asked for there. Whether it's funded is going to be a debate. Capital outlay maintenance, are we going to go with this, some of this, are we going to assume some of this extra $3+ billion is one time? That's a big question. And I guarantee you they probably will. They'll want to put in one-time stuff. So start looking for one-time things. You know, I know school construction, maybe they put some there again. You know, they did $850 million a couple years ago. Metro, it's a big demand. You know, there was money put into that in the last budget. And they probably need more, right, Jeff? Need more, a lot more. So that's going to be demand. You have this climate and resiliency funding in need. You saw what happened in North Carolina, even parts of West Virginia. You know, so money going to be asked for there. So those are just some examples, and one I didn't put down there is constitutional officers and sheriff's funding. You know, there's tens of millions there. They're going to be asked. I'm sure other local requests, maybe not this magnitude, but there are others. So that gets you to the point of this presentation. I got about a half hour, so pretty good. Everyone kind of understand the current budget situation more or less. I mean, I know it's quick, hard, quick, but you know, things are pretty good, but there's still demands out there, and we've got a lot of demands to fulfill K-12 through the JLR report, all right? But, you know, we can do some things this session with the money we have. How they do it, that's the next part of this. So to get the JLR to fund that, should we increase taxes, you know? But we also have, and I just heard, maybe I'm wrong, but I could have sworn I saw the speaker in a newspaper say, the Speaker of the House, Democrats say we should cut taxes. I don't know how he wants to cut. He didn't say that. Does somebody know what he meant by that? I don't. But maybe additional child care tax credit, for example, you know, would be something we have on this plate. Throwing that out. I have no idea, so just throwing that out. So tax cuts on the table too, with that $3 billion. Okay, and a higher base that we didn't know we had going forward. So tax cuts are going to compete with spending increases. And then you have the spending increases, you have the dichotomy between should it be one time, or do we really think this higher base of revenues and good economies continue? Can we afford to put a lot more into ongoing spending? That will be a debate too. That has been a debate for the last 3 or 4 years. And the one time is won out over the ongoing in the main. Okay? So to fund JLAR, that's ongoing. You got to have ongoing revenues to do that. And do they think they're going to? I do. I don't know if they do. Okay? This is what they did in the last few years. They made the income tax essentially more progressive by finally raising the doubling the standard deduction, almost doubling, and then also making a refundable earned income tax credit rather than just the earned income tax credit we have, which if you didn't pay tax, you didn't get your money. Now you can go past, your tax, what you don't. So, and the military as well in there, and then cutting food and everything except the local 1%. So we have a 1% tax on food, which is going to the workers. But it affected you, and they had to make up for it on the school-age population distribution on the back. So it did affect you that they cut food out of the tax base from sales taxes. So like I said, 2.5, 2.3, $1.5 billion ongoing. A big chunk of that extra billion was the one-time rebates we got in the mail. That's not ongoing. So how are we considered as a state? We're still considered a low-tax state if you look at it in terms of our wealth. We're kind of in the middle if you say per capita, but Virginia is a fairly wealthy state. We like rank number 12 out of the states. So if you put that in as well on top, we're still 42% of personal income basis on how much we tax our citizens, state and local, both state and local. That's still relatively low. Many people don't look at it that way. They look at it per capita. But people, if they have more money, it's easier for them to pay those per capita taxes. So if you look at a percent of personal income, we come out better. But if you look at the individual categories, we rely, and Vivian Watts said this yesterday, and she's right, we rely on our income taxes a lot more than Virginia. As I said earlier, general funds, it's over 2/3 of our general fund, the income taxes. We start our top rate at a really low taxable income level of $17,000. And so most people are paying that highest rate. Because we started so low, we haven't adjusted that. And you kind of see how we compare to our surrounding states as ranked. We're we're not the lowest, not the highest. Maryland ranks, they rely more on us, and then Georgia, kind of like us, but a lot lower than North Carolina, for example. And as a caveat, North Carolina's continuing to lower their income tax rate. Governor Young keeps bringing this up. And I think it's a year or two, they'll be down from a little under 5% down to 4% flat tax. 4% flat tax in North Carolina. This is how we look in terms of our income. We're kind of in the middle, our highest rate. There's a number of states on the left-hand side that don't have an income tax at all. And then you see us kind of in the middle. And then you see my home state of California way up. And my siblings and when they talk about that. So, they're 13.3, their highest mark. Hawaii is the next. We did, as I kind of mentioned earlier, we did increase our progressivity, and JLUX kind of measured it, and so we by raising our standard deductions, 2/3 of filers use the standard deductions. We're impacting a lot of people, a lot of tax returns. Not most of the tax money that goes to the itemizers, but most of the people. And that was good. So we hadn't changed in a long time. It helped a lot of middle income, low income people. And refundable earned income it did as well. So I gave you little stats at the bottom of that, how their actual effective tax rates, the total that they pay actually went down quite a bit. You'll see that because we did that. So now, as I mentioned, we have this 5.75 rate. What if we, if we look at regionally, West Virginia, 6.5, Maryland, like us, but they start at much higher, 250,000, so you got to kind of look at that. Remember I told you about North Carolina, that's actually 26 on 4.0, with that. Tennessee does not have income tax, so that's how we compare to our surrounding states. Income tax. So if you wanted to raise the income tax, there's been a discussion about putting a new top rate of income tax since I was a young guy at Senate Finance at age 29. There was proposals to put another bracket in at 100,000 above, like 6 or 6.25, and that's been swirling for a long time doing that. What would it do? So if you put a 7% at 600,000 or above, and that's 600,000. The reason I put that is that's the top 1%, close to the top 1% of filers, over 600,000. Okay, probably a little higher than that, but it's pretty close. So you would get 510 million per year, but it would grow over time too. Okay, so a significant amount of money. Put it over for the top 1%. If you created two ones, a little higher at 100,000 and above, and then another one over $1 million at 675, you'd get 600 million per year, and it would grow over time. So that gives you an idea. I did put a little note down here, though, that Planning District 8, Northern Virginia, they file 31% of the tax returns, but they pay 47% of the state's income tax, and 52% of the state's income, adjusted gross income, or tax above 100,000. So if you did that, that's where it would hit. Now let's look at sales tax. So our effective rate, even though you can pay a maximum rate of 7%, some areas don't. Because remember, we have Trine, we have 1% of the Trine, we have 8 localities that pay for school construction, we have regional taxes, 0.7. So a lot of places pay 6%, a few pay 7%, but if you look at it in total, it's about 5.77 effective sales tax rate. And that's how, you got to do that for every state. They have sales taxes are all over the place, state and local. So you see, we're at the lower end of the rates of sales taxes. 5 states don't have a sales tax at all. 45, only 4 of the 45 remain tax services by default. The rest of them, the rest of the 41, it's by exceptional. You know, you're going to have to describe which one you're going to tax. And Virginia doesn't have very many, so we're pretty low on it. We have a low level of sales taxes on services. I'm going to show you more about that. So this came out of a Senate Finance document, a recent one, about how much you get in tax services sort of across the board. You pick categories out, and I try to simplify this. So you go to the white collar guys, and you get $4.3 billion a year to start taxing, you know, architecture and accounting, legal clerk, engineering, and generally computer services. You go down business services, pretty large too. You get down to personal services, and it's a little under $1 billion, so it's not as much. And those have always been the ones people have thought about the easiest ones to go after, is personal services. It's pretty hard to tax the lawyers. Okay. If you don't tax the lawyers, it's pretty hard to get the plumbers and electricians and stuff. They wouldn't like it. So personal services kind of come down to that, you know, in the discussion at some time. Well, the new discussion that's come up, of course, has been the new age kind of digital services, so which is really new. It's grown rapidly in the last 10 years. You know, this just gives you a little flavor. This chart of our surrounding states, and we're the lowest in our rate. So we've got room, is my point. The tax services lower, and we have a lower rate. You know, remember, income taxes, we're kind of on the high end in terms of what we get from that. The sales tax is kind of the low end. It kind of gives you a hint where I'm going, about what the best option might be. Now you look at the exempt categories. You look at Virginia about this new economy going on, the various digital download software, computer-related services, data storage, website hosting. We don't tax any of that. Look at North Carolina. Remember, lower income tax, but they tax some of that. They have a higher sales tax too. They got to get their money somewhere. So that's where they're getting it. They're taxing it here. They're taxing a little higher rate. And go back to North Carolina. They got an effective rate of 7%. We're 5.77. Okay. So that's how they get their money, some of their money. What have been the recent proposals? And this is where it gets really interesting. You probably know this. I'll reiterate it. The General Assembly enrolled the bill, nothing that passed it, sent it to the governor in April to tax those, you know, a range of digital new economy services. And they even did some business to business, which were sort of the final stop. They considered these types were the final stop. So it wasn't like a middleman. And they applied to that too. And they got, going forward, it was $1 billion for the biennium, but going forward, it's $750 million a year. So that's a good chunk of money that they actually passed the General Assembly. The governor would not sign it. That's why it took till June to get a budget, because they had to finally drop that, come to consensus over the rest of the budget. But that has been teed up by the existing General Assembly taxing, you know, the new age digital economy services. Delegate Watts actually went beyond that in the bill she put forward. She taxed them. She got rid of that 1%, the food on the local 1%, but she made up for it by applying some of these to the CSUT tax, the local tax, and communication services tax, which you get on, and then by the expanded base, you would make up that 1% that comes to you, and the 1.25 that goes back to school age population would also be expanded. So you would more than make up for the loss of the food by expanding the base. And the money coming back to localities in those three different ways. Okay, the higher base for your own, the higher base for the school age population school distribution. But what they did pass has been teed up. I want to throw this in. Can't say for fun, but it's an interesting topic. Data centers, I'm sure it's been on your mind a lot in a lot of places. Virginia's the epicenter of data centers, and it's big business in Virginia. You know, there's lots of local revenue. Loudon and Prince William, I'm sure, and others really know. There's not as many new jobs, but there's a lot of investment, there's a lot of equipment, and it gets replaced a lot. So it's big business, and guess what? That sales tax exemption, this is the single largest sales tax exemption by far. Over $900 million a year now. All that equipment that keeps getting bought and replaced doesn't pay a sales tax on. So it's big business, but Virginia's local government's benefiting, so I don't know how you feel about it. That's just the facts, okay? Facts are a lot of local revenue, say the state's losing a lot of money from having that exemption. What would these data centers continue to come to Virginia? I don't think anyone knows. Another exemption. So here's how the sales tax is cut up. It's a rather complicated exercise where we get. So you only have a little over 2% of that, max 7% or the 577 across the state, depending on what locality you live in, is that general fund unrestricted use range. And then the rest of it starts getting cut up. First, you go to the schools, school age population distribution, then the transfer that they made, which is still general funds, goes through the composite index. Then you got transportation, they get 0.9 directly to the state, and that gets cut up through the highway maintenance and operating fund, and then through the transportation trust fund for airports, ports, transit, and intercity rail. You see that? That gets you the state share of 4.3%. That's the state and how it cuts it up. Then you've got local governments, 1%, which still has the bigger base with food in it. And then you got the regional taxes, the 3 regional, 3.7. Go directly to your regions, they use transportation, the historic triangle 1%, and then the local school construction. So you can possibly pay 7% right now. In the future, maybe more, because let's say a historic triangle one gets a school construction percent, and they pay 8%, but it doesn't have to. So that's how sales tax is cut up. And I just put a couple of appendices so you can see how the money flowed in, actual money, the general funds. And then you can see what's grown over time. Corporate's a lot smaller, it's grown a lot smaller than individual. Individual's grown a lot more in sales taxes over time. So it does raise money quicker, but maybe by applying it to the new age economy and services, which has grown way faster than goods. In fact, a caveat, one of the areas this year, this fiscal year, I think is going to be slow growing is sales taxes. Because people aren't buying goods as much. They bought a lot during the pandemic, that's slowed down. Home Depot stock hasn't been doing well, as an example. I mean, there was a lot of home construction stuff going on at Home Depot, etc. And it's slowed. And so I think sales taxes probably, you're going to see not a lot of growth there. Okay? Sales taxes. So again, back to maybe we need to apply more to services. And then I give you a little slide just to refresh everyone that non-general funds are all dedicated use money and higher ed tuition, the hospital revenues from state hospitals, the federal money that comes in, the Medicaid federal money, the federal transportation money, the state transportation money, all dedicated to specific uses. So that's $85 billion a year. But the General Assembly doesn't mess with that as much. That $32 billion general fund is really where they balance and they have, where you are most interested in the general fund. That is what I have. Hold on, I'm happy to open it up to the field and answer some questions.
Well, go ahead, Jim, you're up there, stand up there. Folks, you have questions, why don't we start over here and go this way, and then we'll come back that way. Anybody with questions over on my left side, your right side? Just a minute. If you could stand up, that might help others to hear your question.
Chair of Loudoun County. I think I missed something, and I apologize. Talk again about data centers, because you did say they didn't pay sales taxes. You didn't talk about the personal property taxes that they pay, which is a huge amount.
Oh yeah, I did. I said that is a huge thing for localities. That's a huge benefit, significant. Look at that second line there.
Yeah,
significant 10 on data centers.
Okay.
Huge amounts of money. That's
okay.
Yeah. Big business, very big business, and a lot of tax rate for local government. Yes.
Heading to my right, your left. Yes, sir.
John Vernon from James City County. Jim, you didn't talk a lot specifically about transportation funds. We know that the mass transit faces some serious problems in terms of declining ridership, but it's only starting to come reduction in maintenance of roads or on transit?
I don't think there is any instant memory. It wasn't too long ago, only a few years back, that they added revenues to transportation. They increased the gas tax. They then applied inflation to it, so every year it would go up. In Virginia, when we didn't have that, and the appetite for raising taxes on transportation, I don't think is there right now. So that's why you've seen transfers from the general fund with these surpluses to I-64 to help that widening, and I-81 and the metro. That happens, so you're seeing transfers from the general fund to transportation. I see very little appetite for an increase in, I could be wrong, but I don't think that's bad. I've seen that on the plate anymore. Because they just did it. It's hard to come to that consensus. They kind of get there every 15 years.
Gas tax keeps producing less revenue, doesn't it?
Well, you know, I was in on these with the Secretary of Transportation, all the studies done with the adoption of EVs, you know, and fuel taxes going down, that transit hasn't happened nearly as fast as they thought. So they didn't have, coming up with a tax source to make up for that in total was difficult. It really is. I mean, that's why they've gone to sales taxes, for example, the regional sales tax for transportation. So that's pretty new. For Central Street, for example, that's pretty new. You know, if you, there's a good point, John. So if you expand that base, remember that list I showed you at the end of those tax, of those where the sales tax goes for transportation benefits? You expand the base, they get money too. So that would help. Okay.
Andrea David, Prince William County. You talked about the comparison between the sales tax and the services tax, that there was an opportunity there. Could you kind of dig a little deeper about what that looks like in terms of the transition? Because that's a paradigm shift.
You mean increasing, you know, applying the sales tax base to digital services, computer services, etc.? It wouldn't be hard. You know, you literally, I mean, it might be hard, it might be different for the businesses, yes, but not for the state to enact the law. Now, the reaction of business to that, unknown, but a lot of states do it. So it's not like it would be new across the country, because a lot of states already do that. They applied their tax, sales tax, to this new age. Think of okay, you're getting your Netflix bill. Now you have a sales tax applied to it. I mean, the tax, like anything else, it just gets applied. So.
Anybody else on my right and your left? Yes, sir, and then we'll go back to you, sir.
Yeah, Fitzgerald Barnes, Louisiana County Board of Supervisors. We were talking, there wasn't really a hint, you know, I know in the Dillon rule, about cigarette tax. And maybe if we could tackle something like affordable housing, let the money go toward locality affordable housing. Because I don't care what conference I'm going to, affordable housing is normally at the top of the list. So it might be better to accept or swallow if those taxes, they're going to be taxed, and that money will go toward affordable housing.
Sir, the cigarette tax right now goes to the Virginia Healthcare Fund. The Virginia Healthcare Fund basically helps pay for Medicaid. So they would have to swap that out, that money, and they do it all, not necessarily cigarettes, but the Healthcare Fund also has reimbursements in it from hospital reimbursements that go into that, and that goes up and down. So they often have, in fact, they had to fill a hole in general funds last session because they weren't getting as much money as they had in the past in the Virginia Healthcare Fund. The cigarette tax is $240 million or something a year at the state level, and then locals get it too, but that would, you'd have to then come up with the money. You might as well just take general funds and put it in affordable housing. It'd be the same thing, essentially.
Thank you. And this gentleman back here behind the, yes, sir.
Dan Witt, Charlotte County. You mentioned public safety, but didn't talk about fire and EMS, specifically for rural counties that our volunteer systems are failing. We have new drug box regulations, OSHA regulations for all of these things coming down for limited, very limited resources locally. Is the state doing anything related to public safety for fire and rescue.
Jeremy, maybe you can help me with that one?
Yeah, thanks, Jim, and Dan, great question.
Jim, how do you walk to the front here, so.
Oh, yes, sir.
See,
Thank you.
there's a microphone here too.
You have a really good VACo staff, and they get down in the weeds on a lot of this stuff, so use them as a resource, definitely.
Yeah, thank you, Supervisor, and thank you, Jim. Dan, really great question. Obviously, volunteerism across the state is going down. The cost of apparatus, whether it's a fire truck or whatever, that's how one figure is up 100%. And our call volume is increasing, and state funding, such as it is remaining flat. So we're actually having a breakout session, the last breakout session group of the day on public safety. So really get hopefully into the weeds on a lot of this. And one of the members of that panel is Delegate Sickles, who introduced last year HB 2175, which was mandating a study of fire and EMS services and needs across the Commonwealth. And we wrote about that, and it was really revealing, showing how dire the need is across the state of Virginia. 20% of localities are reliant on mutual aid on a daily basis. So, unfortunately, a lot of those recommendations were not included into budget action, but Delegate Sickles, to his credit, brought forward budget language and funding to do a further study, which VACo has been a part of, along with our friends in the chiefs and firefighters. And it's shown that basically localities, according to Auditor Public Accounts, they're paying 97, 98 fire EMS costs across the state. And we're getting to the point with the drugs box issue, with other issues, potentially the OSHA regulations. We could be facing an existential crisis for a lot of our rural volunteer departments. So I think the purpose of these studies, much like the JLAR study for education, is to show the need, show that things are dire, and that localities have been carrying this responsibility for so long, but we do need additional state or federal aid, especially in some of our struggling jurisdictions, in order to make sure that, if you have, God forbid, you have a car crash in Virginia, someone's going to come when you dial 911. So I would say we'll get a deeper dive this afternoon. It's definitely a pertinent question. And additional state aid is something that VACo is always lobbying for, and I think working on these studies, that's how we demonstrate to the public, to the General Assembly, that further action is needed.
Jeremy, do you have a sense of the magnitude of the dollars needed?
I don't have that information in front of me. It's interesting because traditionally it's not been a state responsibility. There hasn't been, we have aid for localities, we have 4 for Life, the Rescue Squad Assistance Fund, that help around the margins. And in the grand scheme of things, when you compare to like direct aid for education, we're talking $1 billion commitments by the state, and they're still not meeting their fair share. Any additional aid that we can get will be helpful, but in terms of a set dollar figure that we need, I'm hopeful that the study that will be coming out the next few weeks from the VCU work group that we were part of, that will, and I haven't seen the final draft, but that will have some concrete dollar figures and suggestions, recommendations that the state can pursue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to keep going this way to my left, your right. Yes, sir.
Jim, Paul Mahoney, Board of Supervisors, Roanoke County. Yesterday, one of our sessions, Vivian Watts gave us an excellent presentation on her proposal or her bill with respect to sales tax services. But in her discussion, she also referenced the state income tax, and she talked about how if you indexed our income taxes to inflation, the problems that would cause. Are you aware of folks at the state having done a calculation as to what percentage impact that might have on state income tax revenue?
I didn't, I was there, and I don't actually remember her talking about indexing, was she talking about indexing the standard deduction? Or
I thought it was to rates, but she did it in passing.
Yeah,
it was real quick.
I've never heard of anyone propose indexing rates to inflation.
Okay.
So I don't see that happening. Doesn't mean it won't, but I just haven't. So I mean, you just take inflation 2% and you index the rates and get an idea of how much more of the revenue you would get. It's 3%, 4% inflation. That would give you a rough idea, not exact, but a rough idea of how much more that would generate each year on top of what you're already doing.
you. Again, to your right, anyone, and we're going to go back to my right, your left. Yes, ma'am.
Last year's the budget debate seemed to rely a lot around different philosophies around tax policy. Is there a chatter that heading into this session we'll see some big movement in tax policy?
Good question. Governor Youngkin, remember last year, he proposed reducing the state's income tax rate and corporate income tax rate, and his rationale was to better compete with states like North Carolina. And that, his rationale, we were losing citizens out of migration, and he thought that was part of the reason. And so I wouldn't be surprised at all if he reintroduces that. It did not go anywhere in the General Assembly, so you don't know if he's going to try to take another stab at that or not. But that was his rationale. He wanted to reduce those income tax rates, both individual and corporate, to better compete with other states and to drive better business growth. That was his rationale.
Thank you. There's a, yes, sir. If you could stand up so everybody can hear your question. Thank you.
So the last 6 months, we've been hearing a lot about tariffs, okay? And the question I have is, I live in the Hampton Roads area, which is a huge, import industry, provider. So what's the thinking? Are tariffs going to hurt the Virginia economy, or are they going to help the Virginia economy, or is it just a retail issue?
I think that is a very divisive answer, because I think people have different opinions. I don't know that, we had tariffs put in place, not of the magnitude that President-elect Trump is proposing last time, and the Biden administration kept a lot of those on. A lot of those on China. We did have a lot of noise in the last Trump administration about other countries reciprocating with their tariffs, but we ended up having negotiations with Mexico and with Europe, and so things didn't turn out so bad there. In fact, NAFTA got reapproved. There are so many things that can go on from here to there. I think the potential issues, this is just me talking now, the potential issues is prices go up, that supply chains get impacted depending, you could also make an argument that you need some more tariffs on China that are taking advantage of us. They do a lot of things. So, there's a lot of arguments you can make, and we have to see, here in the last few days, and now Congress thinks that they're going to have to get involved to allow these kinds of tariffs to be, even the Republican Senate. Rick Scott was saying he thinks it's going to have to go through Congress. So, that once you throw that into Congress, that changes the environment about what actually happens. So, it is so up in the air, this tariff issue, that I'm hesitant to, impact. I just gave you a couple examples that people are fearful of, though. Supply chains and price increases.
Fair answer, thanks.
All right. We'll keep going to my right, your left. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Phil North, Roanoke County Chair. In the transportation breakout yesterday, Delegate Austin was talking about funding for transportation, and in the future, he was thinking we're going to probably have to consider going to a mileage-based program to offset less fuel tax. Can you comment on that, or if there's been any studies?
Yeah, that was studied like crazy in 2019 doing that. It's very difficult to do. A lot of states have thought about that. I think Oregon had a pilot program. It was pretty tough. People got to monitor their odometers. It gets into people complaining about big government. Looking into what they're doing. That's a tough. It makes a lot of sense academically to do that. The more you're on the highways, the more you're pounding them, the more you're causing the issues of the maintenance and need more roads. But to actually implement that, maybe AI will help us.
Today, the inspection process is recorded.
Say that again?
It's already recorded in the inspection process.
Well, you bring your odometer, and you could do that, but you start applying to DMV, and I wrote this in my, that's, Phil, you made an example of how you could do it, right? Every year you go in and you pay a tax based on how much your car is, then you start getting people flipping their odometer.
Well, Delegate Austin says he has on his car a measure, and it's not the odometer, it's something that records it.
How about that? How about that 1997 car my dad drives?
You should be paying much tax for that car anyway.
You're right about that.
Andrea didn't mention.
Thank you. Andrea Bailey again, Potomac District, Pennsylvania County. The investment of $44 million for our military survivors and stipend is pretty substantial. And is that something that's going to be consistent? Because a lot of us have military in our community, but the impact that they invest in economically in the state is pretty substantial. So what does that look like?
The tuition program?
Yes.
I think, help me if anyone knows more though, I think that debate's kind of over. I think that's the end, so what I put in there is that higher ed wants to be reimbursed for allowing that, for having that happen. They're losing money because the tuition is lower, so they want to have the state help them pay for that through general funds. So I think the debate on actually giving that reduced tuition is over. Yeah, so I think that's going to continue.
That's public and private.
Am I right about that, Bill? Based on. So, yeah, if you're a beneficiary and you know, that's going to continue.
Thanks, Jim. Meg?
Thank you. Meg Monkey, Stafford County. When I look at page 12, under local jail per diem, obviously things shifted from 2009 to 2014 when we had the recession. Boy, those numbers have really continued to go down. And I hear from one of my colleagues on our jail board, you just getting hit with additional costs. We have salaries that we have to pay over there, trying to keep up with everybody else in the region. What are their thoughts on this?
The state's thoughts or the local government's thoughts? You know, who is in charge of public safety? VACo staff.
Katie and I split jails.
Yeah. Well, you know, I know the local government, and I agree with it completely. It's kind of crazy how much they pay for that. You know, and it was done originally. The reduction was done in the 2009 recession. That's the impact of recession. The big, huge ones like that. Things get cut, and then they don't get restored so fast, and then costs go up, and they don't even get restored to that. So, yeah, I think the state.
But no, those costs are continuing to go down.
Well, not costs. That's how much you get reimbursed.
Right, the reimbursement.
Yeah, well, part of that is because you have fewer people in your jails. That's part of it. There's fewer, right?
Our finance committee, we have had this as an issue of every single finance committee I've been on, and we just updated. So when you see the platform, you'll see the updated numbers that are in the report that comes out of the finance steering committee. So take a look at that. But we have been advocating for changes and improvements of that at the state level. So, but it's a struggle, as you can see from the numbers and the results so far.
All right, thank you very much.
Jeremy, do you know about the numbers there? The numbers in jail? I know the state correction system, the numbers of people in the grade, has been going down.
I got the numbers here.
I don't know how to hit that. I'm wondering if that's part of the reason why those numbers have been going down.
Jim, any discussion about do anything about the impact of the real estate exemption constitutional amendment just passed, plus the previous action because of the differential impact it has on local counties?
That was discussed yesterday in the steering committees about how big that is, and VACo would like somehow to get relief from the state. They're going to keep passing these things, but that is a live issue. That's just sort of bubbling to the top of the local government level. It keeps growing, and now they just passed a new one. So, I mean, the state has not said, yeah, we're going to step in and give you relief by the money. No. And do I expect them to do that? You can keep advocating.
Well, it's 11:15. I think we've tried to answer most questions. I know, Jim, you'll be up here a little bit longer if people want to come and ask individual questions. Thank you very much.